6 weeks later, Marcus stood at the window of his new office on the 42nd floor of Wellington Tower, watching as evening descended over Manhattan. The view was different from this side of the building. Central Park, visible in the distance, the geometric patterns of the city grid illuminated as darkness fell. It was his view now, not a temporary accommodation, but a permanent space reflecting his new position as Director of Inclusive Technologies at Wellington Industries. The Tech Assist acquisition had closed that morning, the final documents signed in a conference room, filled with executives, lawyers, and financial representatives from both companies. What had begun as a straightforward business transaction had evolved into something far more significant, a strategic realignment that positioned Wellington Industries at the forefront of accessible technology development while establishing new standards for inclusive design practices. The terms of the acquisition had expanded considerably from the initial framework. Beyond the financial arrangements, fair but not excessive, Catherine had insisted on structural commitments that transformed the fundamental approach to product development. The newly established User Experience Division, staffed primarily by deaf and hard-of-hearing professionals, was given equal standing with the engineering team. The Youth Advisory Board, with Lily among its founding members, was formally integrated into the product development cycle with meaningful input on design decisions. Most significantly, the revised acquisition terms included a pledge that 20% of all profits from Tech Assist products would be directed to a newly established foundation providing assistive technologies to low-income users, ensuring that innovations wouldn't be restricted to those who could afford premium price points. A knock at his office door interrupted Marcus's reflection. He turned to see Catherine standing in the doorway, still dressed in the elegant blue suit she'd worn for the acquisition signing ceremony. "Congratulations," she said, both speaking and signing as had become their custom. "The board unanimously approved your appointment this afternoon. It's official now." Marcus nodded, still somewhat amazed by the trajectory his career had taken. When the acquisition planning had entered its final stages, Catherine had approached him with an unexpected proposal. Rather than returning to Blackstone and Associates, would he consider joining Wellington Industries permanently to lead a new division focused on inclusive technology integration? The role would leverage both his financial acumen and his personal understanding of accessibility challenges, overseeing not just the Tech Assist integration, but future acquisitions and developments in the accessibility space. It represented a career leap that would typically require years, if not decades, to achieve, from intern to director in the span of 2 months. "Thank you," he replied, "though I'm still not entirely convinced I'm qualified for this position." Catherine smiled, moving into the office to join him by the window. "Qualification isn't merely about years of experience, Marcus. It's about perspective, insight, and the ability to bridge different worlds. In the qualities that matter most for this role, you're more qualified than candidates with 20 years in technology management." She gestured toward a sleek package on his desk, the final prototype of the redesigned NeuroLink system, now called the Wellington Connect, scheduled for release next quarter. "Besides, the proof is in the results. The improvements implemented based on your and Lily's feedback have transformed a technically impressive but functionally limited product into something genuinely revolutionary." Marcus picked up the device, still marveling at how dramatically it had evolved over the past 6 weeks. The interface had been completely reimagined based on Lily's initial critiques, with subsequent refinements from the newly established User Experience Division. What had begun as a communication tool primarily designed for business settings had expanded into an adaptive system that could seamlessly transition between professional, educational, social, and emergency contexts. "It's a team achievement," he said, setting the prototype back on his desk. "The engineers at Tech Assist are brilliant. They just needed to hear perspectives they hadn't considered." "Which is precisely why your division exists now," Catherine replied. She paused, studying him with the perceptive gaze that seemed to be her hallmark. "Your parents must be proud." Marcus smiled, thinking of his family's reaction when he'd told them about his permanent position at Wellington. His father had remained stoic as always, but the slight trembling of his hands as he'd poured celebratory tea revealed his emotion. His mother had been less restrained, alternating between tearful joy and practical questions about benefits and retirement plans. "They are," he acknowledged, though I think they're even more excited about Lily's role on the Youth Advisory Board, seeing her valued for her perspective rather than accommodated despite it. That means everything to them. And to Lily? Catherine asked, genuine interest in her expression. She's thriving, Marcus replied, unable to keep pride from his voice. The first stipend she received, she insisted on opening her own bank account, said it was professional income, not allowance money, and should be treated accordingly. Catherine laughed, the sound warm in the quiet office. She's absolutely right. Professional compensation deserves professional handling. She moved to sit in one of the chairs facing his desk, her posture relaxing slightly now that the day's formal proceedings were complete. And how are you adjusting to your new reality, Marcus? The question was asked with the same directness he'd come to appreciate in their interactions. Catherine Wellington might be one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in American business, but she never employed the corporate doublespeak that characterized so many executive communications. She asked what she wanted to know and expected honest answers in return. It's surreal, Marcus admitted, taking the seat across from her. 2 months ago, I was an intern surviving on ramen noodles and hoping to make enough of an impression to receive a job offer after graduation. Now I'm leading a division at Wellington Industries, with a team of 30 people reporting to me and a compensation package that allowed my parents to retire early. He shook his head slightly. Sometimes I wake up thinking it must have been a dream. Not a dream, Catherine said, though perhaps something equally rare, a genuine recognition of merit without the usual barriers of pedigree, connections, or arbitrary experience requirements. She leaned forward slightly. You know, when we met in that cafe, I had just come from a particularly frustrating board meeting. 3 hours of watching privileged executives discuss diversity initiatives and accessibility commitments with absolutely no understanding of the communities they claim to serve. She smiled, a hint of irony touching her expression. I went downstairs for coffee, thinking I would collect my thoughts before calling my driver. Instead, I couldn't even order a simple latte because the barista couldn't understand that I was deaf, not stupid. And then I appeared, Marcus said, beginning to understand, with my borrowed suit and weathered backpack, and greeted me in perfect ASL without hesitation, Catherine finished. No awkwardness, no condescension, no expectation of gratitude or recognition, just a simple human connection. She gestured around them, encompassing the office, the building, the company. All of this, the technology we develop, the acquisitions we make, the policies we implement, it's ultimately about creating those connections, bridging gaps that separate people unnecessarily. Her expression turned reflective. When I lost my hearing at 25, I discovered how quickly people can become invisible when communication requires effort, how easily human connection fractures when conventional channels are disrupted. She met his gaze directly. What you did that night wasn't just kindness, Marcus. It was recognition, seeing me as a person first, not a problem to be solved or an inconvenience to be managed. The simple articulation of what had been, for Marcus, an instinctive action resonated deeply. Growing up with Lily, he'd witnessed daily the subtle ways in which deaf individuals were rendered invisible in a hearing world, the conversations that flowed around them, the decisions made without their input, the assumptions about their capabilities based solely on their inability to hear. It wasn't exceptional, he said quietly. It's how everyone should be treated. Precisely, Catherine agreed. And yet, it remains exceptional in practice. Which is why Wellington Industries exists, to normalize what should already be normal. She smiled. And why I'm particularly pleased that the board approved not only your appointment, but the expansion plans for your division. Marcus raised his eyebrows in question. Expansion plans? Yes, Catherine confirmed, satisfaction evident in her expression. Beginning next quarter, your Inclusive Technologies division will oversee the development of a comprehensive educational initiative, providing technology, training, and support to schools with deaf and hard-of-hearing students across the country. She reached into her briefcase and extracted a folder, sliding it across the desk to him. The preliminary framework is outlined here. We'll be offering the Wellington Connect system to qualifying schools at significantly reduced cost, with comprehensive training and ongoing support. The goal is to ensure that deaf students have access to the same educational opportunities as their hearing peers, regardless of their school's budget constraints. Marcus opened the folder, scanning the initial proposal with growing amazement. The initiative was ambitious in scope, potentially reaching thousands of schools and tens of thousands of deaf students nationwide. The financial commitment was equally impressive, representing a significant investment with limited short-term profit potential. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, looking up from the documents. "The impact could be transformative for deaf education." "That's the intention," Catherine replied. "And we'd like Lily's Youth Advisory Board to play a central role in shaping the implementation. Who better to guide an educational initiative than the students who will benefit from it?" The thoughtful inclusion of Lily's perspective, not as an afterthought but as a central consideration, reinforced Marcus's growing appreciation for Catherine's approach to leadership. She didn't merely talk about inclusion, she structured her business practices around it, recognizing that meaningful change required more than charitable gestures or public commitments. "I'm honored to lead this initiative," Marcus said, genuine gratitude in his voice, "and I know Lily and her fellow board members will be thrilled to contribute." "Excellent," Catherine stood, signaling the conclusion of their meeting. "The formal announcement will be made next week, along with the release of our quarterly earnings report." She paused, her expression softening slightly. "One more item before I go. This weekend is the Wellington Industries family picnic at my estate in the Hamptons. All employees and their families are invited. I hope you'll bring your parents and Lily. I'd like to meet them properly, outside the context of business meetings." The invitation, casual yet significant, underscored the unusual relationship that had developed between them. Catherine was his employer, certainly, but she was also something more complex. A mentor, perhaps, or an ally in navigating worlds that had previously seemed inaccessible to someone with his background. "We'd be honored," Marcus replied, rising as well, "though I should warn you that my mother will likely bring homemade dumplings. She never attends any gathering empty-handed." Catherine smiled, a genuine warmth lighting her features. "I look forward to trying them. Homemade food is always more meaningful than catered perfection." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Marcus, the car service will continue permanently as part of your executive compensation package. Miguel specifically requested to remain as your driver. He says you're one of the few executives who bothers to ask about his children." With that, she departed, leaving Marcus to absorb the latest developments in what continued to be an extraordinary transformation of his professional and personal circumstances. Later that evening, as Miguel drove him home to Queens for perhaps the last time, Marcus had begun looking at apartments in Manhattan, closer to Wellington Tower. He reflected on the strange symmetry of his journey. 2 months ago, he had been an outsider in the world of high finance and corporate technology, struggling to prove his worth despite the disadvantages of his background. Now he was an insider in that same world, with the power to open doors for others facing similar barriers. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a purpose. The educational initiative Catherine had outlined represented more than a business opportunity or a charitable endeavor. It was a chance to ensure that children like Lily wouldn't have to overcome unnecessary obstacles to access the tools and opportunities they deserved. A chance to transform what had been exceptional in his sister's education into something standard for deaf students everywhere. When he arrived home, his family was waiting with a small celebration. A homemade cake decorated with the Wellington Industries logo in blue icing, a touching if slightly lopsided attempt at corporate symbolism. Lily had created a congratulatory video in sign language, edited with the professional software she'd been given as part of her Youth Advisory Board role. As they gathered around their modest dining table, Marcus shared the news about the educational initiative, watching as Lily's expression transformed from excitement to disbelief to determined purpose. "I'll need to survey deaf students in different types of schools," she signed immediately, her hands moving with characteristic decisiveness. "Rural, urban, mainstream, deaf only. They'll all have different needs and challenges. We should create focus groups representing diverse backgrounds and communication preferences." Marcus smiled at her immediate shift into strategic planning mode. Catherine specifically mentioned that the Youth Advisory Board would play a central role in shaping the implementation. Lily's eyes widened, the significance of this inclusion clearly registering. Real input, not just approval of decisions already made. Real input, Marcus confirmed. From the earliest planning stages through implementation and assessment. Their father, who had been quietly listening as he always did when his children discussed matters beyond his technical understanding, spoke up in his careful English. "This Wellington woman, she is unusual, yes? Not like typical rich person?" Marcus considered the question thoughtfully. "She's different," he agreed. "She uses her wealth and position to create systemic change, not just charitable gestures. And she genuinely values perspectives that most corporate leaders ignore or tokenize." His father nodded slowly, digesting this assessment. "In China, old story says that true nobility revealed not by how powerful treat equals, but by how they treat those with no power." He smiled slightly. "This Wellington woman, she has true nobility, I think." Later that night, after his parents had retired and Lily had finally exhausted her excitement about the educational initiative, Marcus sat alone in the small living room, contemplating the weekend ahead. The Wellington estate in the Hamptons represented yet another world he had never expected to enter, the rarefied social sphere of America's ultra-wealthy. Yet even as he acknowledged the strangeness of his trajectory, Marcus felt a growing confidence in his ability to navigate these new environments without compromising his identity or values. Catherine had not selected him despite his background, but partly because of it, because his experiences with Lily had given him insights that privileged executives lacked, because his journey from Queens to Manhattan had taught him to bridge worlds that rarely connected. His phone chimed with a message from Catherine. "Contract details finalized for educational initiative. Board unanimously enthusiastic. Looking forward to introducing you to the team on Monday. Bringing your perspective to this project will transform its impact." The simple acknowledgement of his value, not as a diversity statistic or a compelling story, but as a professional whose unique perspective enhanced the company's work, reinforced what Marcus had begun to understand over the past 2 months. True inclusion wasn't about charitable gestures or symbolic representations. It was about recognizing that diverse perspectives weren't accommodations to be tolerated, but assets to be valued, that differences in experience could generate innovations impossible within homogeneous groups. As he prepared for bed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the strange series of coincidences that had led to this moment. If he hadn't worked late that night, if Catherine hadn't chosen that particular cafe, if he hadn't noticed her difficulty communicating with the barista, how different would both their lives be now? The butterfly effect of that simple human connection continued to ripple outward, transforming not just his life and Lily's, but potentially the educational experiences of thousands of deaf students across the country. All because he had greeted a deaf woman in sign language, not knowing the millionaire was watching, not knowing, in fact, that she was the millionaire. 3 days later, Marcus stood on the manicured lawn of Catherine Wellington's Hampton estate, watching as his family integrated seamlessly into the Wellington Industries' annual picnic. His father was engaged in animated conversation with the company's head of international operations, discussing business practices in different Asian markets. His mother, as predicted, had brought homemade dumplings that had proven so popular they'd been placed on the main buffet table, where they were rapidly disappearing amid enthusiastic praise. And Lily was at the center of a small crowd, demonstrating sign language basics to curious colleagues and their children. Her confidence in this setting, her natural ability to bridge communication gaps with patience and humor, filled Marcus with a pride so profound it almost overwhelmed him. "Your sister is a natural teacher," Catherine commented, appearing beside him with 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one to Marcus. "She makes learning sign language seem accessible rather than intimidating." "She's always been that way," Marcus replied, accepting the drink gratefully. "Patient with beginners but pushing them to try, to move beyond basic phrases." They stood in comfortable silence, observing the gathering spread across Catherine's expansive grounds. Employees from every level of Wellington Industries mingled freely, from senior executives to maintenance staff, many accompanied by families representing diverse backgrounds and experiences. What struck Marcus most was the natural integration of accessibility features throughout the event. Sign language interpreters stationed at activity areas, visual notifications accompanying audio announcements, tactile guide paths subtly incorporated into the landscape design. "I want to show you something," Catherine said after a few minutes. "If you can tear yourself away from the festivities for a moment." She led him away from the main gathering toward a more private area of the estate, a path winding through carefully tended gardens to a modern structure that appeared to be a separate office or studio. As they entered, Marcus realized it was a sophisticated technology workshop, with prototyping equipment, testing facilities, and multiple workstations arranged around a central demonstration area. "My personal lab," Catherine explained, noting his curious expression, "where I develop concepts before they enter the formal R&D process at Wellington. Some of our most successful products began as weekend projects here." She moved to a workbench, where a device unlike anything Marcus had seen before rested in a specialized charging dock. It resembled the Wellington Connect system, but with significant modifications and additions. "This is a prototype I've been developing for several months," Catherine said, lifting the device carefully. "The next evolution in accessibility technology, moving beyond communication support to true experiential translation." She activated the device, which projected a holographic interface into the air between them. Current assistive technologies focus primarily on converting speech to text or signs to speech, essentially translating the literal content of communication. This system attempts something more ambitious, translating the experience of sound for someone who has never heard it. Marcus watched, fascinated, as Catherine manipulated the interface, bringing up what appeared to be visual representations of different acoustic environments. "How does it work?" he asked. "It combines advanced haptic feedback with neural mapping of how deaf individuals process sensory information," she explained. "Rather than trying to simulate hearing, it creates corresponding sensory experiences that make sense to someone who perceives the world visually and tactilely." She handed him a component of the system, a slim wristband embedded with micro-haptic actuators. "Try it." Marcus slipped the band onto his wrist. Catherine activated a demonstration sequence, and suddenly he felt intricate patterns of vibration against his skin, rhythmic, varied, almost musical in their complexity. "That's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony," Catherine said. "Not converted to simple vibrations, but mapped to create a corresponding sensory experience that conveys the emotional structure of the music through a different perceptual channel." Marcus stared at the band in amazement. "This is revolutionary. It's not just accessibility, it's translation between sensory worlds." "Exactly," Catherine said, satisfaction evident in her expression. "And that's where I'd like your input. And Lily's, if she's willing. This technology has enormous potential, but it needs to be shaped by individuals with diverse sensory experiences. What feels intuitive to someone who once heard but lost that ability might be completely different from what works for someone deaf from birth." The invitation to collaborate on such cutting-edge technology to help shape something that could fundamentally transform how deaf individuals experience the world struck Marcus as the culmination of the extraordinary journey that had begun in a cafe 2 months earlier. From intern to director to innovation partner, a trajectory that defied conventional career paths or expectations. "We'd be honored to contribute," he said simply. Catherine nodded, her expression reflecting a shared understanding of the significance of this collaboration. "Good. We'll schedule some development sessions next month." She returned the prototype to its charging station. "But enough work talk for today. This is meant to be a celebration, after all." As they made their way back to the main gathering, Catherine asked, "Have you found an apartment yet? Elena mentioned you were looking closer to the office." "Not yet," Marcus admitted. "Manhattan real estate is intimidating, even with my new salary." Catherine smiled. "Wellington owns several residential buildings reserved for key employees. There's a 2-bedroom unit available in our midtown property, 10 minutes from the office. The rent is adjusted to be reasonable, part of our employee retention strategy. Elena can send you the details if you're interested." The offer was presented as a standard company benefit rather than special treatment, allowing Marcus to accept without the discomfort of personal obligation. "That would be helpful, thank you." When they rejoined the picnic, they found Lily engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Sharma from Tech Assist and several members of the newly established User Experience Division. They were discussing modifications to the Wellington Connect interface, with Lily demonstrating a particular navigation challenge on her prototype unit. The haptic feedback for notification priorities still needs refinement, she was signing as they approached. The difference between urgent and important isn't distinctive enough in noisy environments. Dr. Sharma nodded thoughtfully. making notes on her tablet. We could increase the pattern complexity rather than just the intensity. Would that provide better differentiation? Yes, but it needs to remain intuitive, Lily responded. Complex patterns are useful only if they map logically to the information they represent. Marcus watched this professional exchange with a sense of wonder, seeing his 16-year-old sister confidently advising doctoral-level engineers about product design, her insights not merely tolerated, but actively sought and valued. The scene embodied everything Catherine had been working to create, an environment where diverse perspectives enhanced innovation rather than being accommodated as an afterthought. As the afternoon progressed into evening, Marcus found himself drawn into various conversations, with engineering teams excited about the educational initiative, with finance executives curious about his transition from Blackstone, with fellow directors sharing advice about leadership responsibilities. Throughout these interactions, he noticed Catherine circulating among her employees, engaging with everyone from senior vice presidents to catering staff with the same attentive interest. When the gathering finally began to disperse as twilight descended, Catherine approached the Chen family as they prepared to depart. "Mrs. Chen," she said warmly, "your dumplings were extraordinary, the highlight of the buffet. Would you consider sharing the recipe with our corporate chef? He's been raving about them all afternoon." Marcus's mother blushed with pleasure at the compliment. "Family recipe, very simple. I can write down for you, but real secret is in folding technique. Must be precise." "Perhaps a demonstration sometime," Catherine suggested. "We host cooking classes for employees occasionally. Your expertise would be a wonderful addition." The casual invitation, treating his mother's culinary skills as valuable knowledge rather than quaint ethnic cuisine, reflected Catherine's genuine respect for contributions that traditional corporate environments might overlook. Marcus watched as his mother straightened with pride, her usual deference to authority figures replaced by professional confidence in her domain of expertise. "Yes, I can teach dumpling class," she agreed with newfound assurance. "Proper technique, very important." As goodbyes were exchanged and the family settled into the company car that would return them to Queens, Marcus observed a subtle but significant shift in his parents' demeanor. They had entered Catherine's world, a realm of wealth and privilege, far removed from their immigrant experience, and had been received not as outsiders to be accommodated, but as individuals with valuable perspectives to contribute. "She is not what I expected," his father commented, as the car pulled away from the estate. "Catherine Wellington. She has humanity." He seemed to search for the right word in English. "Authenticity." "Yes," Marcus agreed, thinking of his evolving understanding of Catherine over the past 2 months, from mysterious deaf woman in a cafe to billionaire CEO to collaborative partner in creating meaningful change. She's built her company around the principle that diverse perspectives generate better solutions, not as charity or social responsibility, but as sound business strategy. "And she actually listens," Lily added, her signing emphatic. "Not just pretending to consider feedback while already knowing what she wants to do, really listening and adapting based on what she hears." The observation captured something essential about what made Catherine's approach to leadership distinctive in a corporate landscape, often characterized by performative inclusion rather than substantive integration of diverse perspectives. As the car made its way through the darkness toward Queens, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had transformed his life and his family's future. 2 months ago, he had been an anonymous intern struggling to prove his worth in a system designed to favor those with different backgrounds and connections. Now he was a director at one of America's most innovative companies, leading initiatives that would potentially impact thousands of lives while opening doors for others facing similar barriers. The catalyst for this transformation had been a moment of simple human connection, an instinctive response to another person's need, offered without expectation of reward or recognition. That initial interaction had revealed something essential about both Marcus and Catherine, a shared understanding that true innovation emerged not from technical brilliance alone, but from bridging perspectives that rarely converged in traditional corporate environments. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the podium in Wellington Industries' main auditorium, addressing an audience of educators, technology developers, government officials, and members of the deaf community. Behind him, a large screen displayed the launch presentation for the Educational Access Initiative, the comprehensive program providing Wellington Connect systems and support services to schools with deaf and hard-of-hearing students nationwide. Today marks not just the launch of a technology program, he said. Both speaking and signing, as Catherine had taught him, was essential for truly inclusive communication. It represents a fundamental shift in how we approach accessibility in education, not as an accommodation to be granted, but as a right to be fulfilled, not as a charitable initiative, but as an investment in human potential. From her seat in the front row, Catherine nodded slightly, encouragement in her expression. Beside her sat Lily, now a high school senior and the chair of Wellington's Youth Advisory Board, her confidence and poise reflecting the remarkable growth she'd experienced over the past months. The technology we're introducing today was developed with continuous input from the deaf community at every stage, Marcus continued. From initial concept to final implementation, deaf students, educators, and professionals shaped what this system offers and how it functions. He gestured toward the demonstration area, where several Wellington Connect units were displayed. But technology alone isn't enough. That's why this initiative includes comprehensive training, ongoing support, and a commitment to continuous improvement based on real-world feedback from users. As he outlined the specifics of the program, the tiered implementation strategy, the training resources, the assessment protocols designed to measure genuine impact rather than mere distribution metrics, Marcus felt a profound sense of fulfillment. What had begun as a chance encounter in a cafe had evolved into a movement that would potentially transform educational opportunities for deaf students nationwide. When the formal presentation concluded and the networking reception began, Catherine joined him near one of the demonstration stations, where Lily was showing a group of educators how the system could be customized for different classroom configurations. "Impressive presentation," Catherine commented. "Clear, comprehensive, and compelling." The Secretary of Education was particularly engaged. His aide mentioned potential federal funding to expand the program to more schools next year. Marcus nodded, watching as Lily fielded questions with professional confidence, her signing fluid and expressive, as she explained technical features to curious administrators. "It's remarkable to see how far she's come. A year ago, she was fighting for basic accommodations in her high school. Now she's advising cabinet officials on educational technology policy. She's always had the capability," Catherine observed. What changed was the recognition of that capability by those with the power to amplify it. She smiled slightly. Much like her brother, the parallel hadn't escaped Marcus's notice. His own trajectory from anonymous intern to respected executive mirrored Lily's evolution from marginalized student to valued advisor. Both transformations had stemmed from the same catalyst, Catherine's recognition of potential, typically overlooked by traditional systems of evaluation and advancement. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Marcus said, turning to face Catherine directly. "That night in the cafe, was it really chance? Or were you already aware of Blackstone's role in the acquisition and deliberately testing potential team members?" Catherine laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Pure coincidence, I assure you. I had no idea who you were or where you worked. I was simply a deaf woman trying to order coffee after a frustrating board meeting." Her expression turned reflective. "Though perhaps coincidence isn't quite the right word. In my experience, meaningful connections rarely occur by pure chance. They happen when people are open to recognizing each other's humanity beyond social categories or expectations." She glanced toward where Lily was now demonstrating the system to a group of deaf students, her expression animated as she highlighted features designed specifically with their input. "What you did that night, greeting me in sign language without hesitation or awkwardness, revealed something essential about your character. The subsequent opportunities weren't rewards for that kindness. They were recognition of the perspective that made such kindness natural rather than exceptional." The distinction resonated with Marcus's evolving understanding of his journey. Catherine hadn't elevated him as a gesture of gratitude or a feel-good narrative about kindness rewarded. She had recognized in their brief interaction a quality essential for the work Wellington Industries was attempting, the ability to see beyond conventional assumptions and connect across differences that typically remained unbridged. "In any case," Catherine continued, "the results speak for themselves. The Educational Access Initiative exceeds even my optimistic projections for impact and scalability. The Wellington Connect has evolved into a genuinely revolutionary system rather than merely an incremental improvement over existing technologies. And Tech Assist's integration has transformed our entire approach to product development across divisions. She turned to look at him directly, her expression serious despite her light tone. "Not bad for an intern who bought me coffee 8 months ago." Marcus smiled, acknowledging both the humor and the profound truth beneath it. "I still have the receipt for that coffee and muffin. $12.75 that changed everything." "Not the money," Catherine corrected gently. "The recognition, the simple act of seeing me as a person first, not a problem or an opportunity or a category." She gestured toward the crowded reception, where deaf and hearing individuals engaged in seamless communication through technology and interpretation. "That's what we're really developing here, beyond the hardware and software. Technologies of recognition, tools that help us see each other more clearly across the divides that typically separate us." As the reception continued around them, Marcus reflected on this framing of their work, not merely as technological innovation, but as tools for human connection across differences that often seemed insurmountable. It captured something essential about what made Wellington Industries distinctive in the corporate landscape, and what had drawn him so deeply into its mission beyond career advancement or financial reward. Later that evening, as he stood in his midtown apartment overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Marcus called his parents to share news of the successful launch. They had been unable to attend in person, his father recovering from minor surgery, his mother unwilling to leave his side, but had watched the live stream from their new home in a comfortable suburb, purchased with the financial security Marcus's position at Wellington had helped provide. "So proud, son," his father said simply, his English still careful but his emotion clear. "Not just of success, of purpose. You build bridges between worlds." The metaphor struck Marcus as particularly apt. Throughout his life, he had served as a bridge between his immigrant parents and American institutions, between Lily and a world not designed for her needs, between diverse perspectives that rarely converged in traditional settings. What had begun as necessity had evolved into professional purpose, into work that created value precisely because it connected what typically remained separated. After ending the call, Marcus moved to his home office, where he was developing proposals for Wellington's next major initiative, a global expansion of their accessibility technologies focused on regions with limited resources for deaf education and support. On his desk sat a framed photograph from the company holiday party, showing the Chen family with Catherine Wellington, all smiling as Lily demonstrated a sign language game she had developed as part of her internship project. Beside it rested a simple coffee receipt in a small frame, $12.75 from a cafe in the Blackstone building. Catherine had retrieved it from the company's accounting records and presented it to him on his one-year anniversary at Wellington, inscribed with a simple note, "Sometimes the smallest bridges span the greatest divides." As Marcus settled at his desk to continue working on the global initiative proposal, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed not just his life, but his understanding of how meaningful change occurred in the world. Not through grand gestures or strategic calculations, but through simple moments of genuine human connection, through the recognition of another person's humanity beyond the categories that typically defined them. 8 months ago, he had been an anonymous intern, struggling to prove his worth in a system designed to favor those with different backgrounds and connections. Now he was leading initiatives that were transforming how technology served communities typically overlooked by corporate innovation, opening doors for others facing similar barriers, building bridges between worlds that rarely connected meaningfully, all because he had greeted a deaf woman in sign language, not knowing the millionaire was watching. Or perhaps more accurately, because he had greeted a woman in her own language, seeing her as a person first, rather than a problem to be solved or an inconvenience to be managed, because he had approached difference not as a barrier to be overcome, but as an opportunity for connection, because he had recognized another's humanity in a world that too often failed to see beyond categories and assumptions. In that simple act of recognition, offered without expectation of reward or acknowledgement, lay the seed of everything that followed, not just personal advancement or financial security, but work of genuine purpose and impact, work that built bridges between worlds, Work that transformed lives not through charity or accommodation, but through authentic recognition of diverse perspectives as essential rather than peripheral to human progress. As night fell over Manhattan, Marcus continued developing his proposal for the global initiative, knowing that somewhere across the city, Catherine Wellington was likely doing the same. The deaf woman from the cafe and the intern who had greeted her now partners in creating technologies that helped others bridge the divides that separated them, technologies of recognition, tools for seeing each other more clearly across differences that might otherwise keep us apart. In a world increasingly fragmented by division and misunderstanding, perhaps this was the most revolutionary technology of all, the simple, profound capacity to recognize each other's humanity beyond the categories and assumptions that typically defined us, to see each other, truly see each other, across the divides of language, ability, culture, and experience that often remained unbridged. It was this technology, more powerful than any device, more transformative than any algorithm, that Marcus had employed that night in the cafe. And it was this same technology that continued to drive his work at Wellington Industries, creating tools that helped others make those same connections, build those same bridges, see each other with that same clarity and recognition. One conversation, one bridge, one life at a time. In the end, perhaps this was how real change happened in the world, not through grand gestures or revolutionary breakthroughs, but through simple moments of human connection, multiplied across countless interactions, gradually transforming how we saw each other and ourselves. Revolutions not of technology or politics, but of recognition, of truly seeing each other across divides that had seemed insurmountable. As Marcus finalized his proposal for expanding Wellington's accessibility technologies globally, he felt not the weight of responsibility, but the lightness of purpose, the alignment of personal experience, professional capability, and meaningful impact that had transformed an accidental encounter into a journey of unexpected significance, a journey that continued to unfold, one bridge at a time, toward a world where difference invited connection rather than separation, where technology served human recognition rather than replacing it, where simple acts of seeing each other, truly seeing each other, could transform not just individual lives, but the systems and structures that shaped them, all because he had greeted a deaf woman in sign language, not knowing that in that simple act of recognition lay the seed of something far greater than either of them could have imagined.